Number 1. One day, when I was 8 years old, I went to the swimming pool with my mom and 2 neighbors, an old couple, Jock and his wife, and their granddaughter Carla, who was about 12 years old or so. The rule was that I was allowed to go by the pool, but not down in the water without Carla. And since it was very hot, I asked Carla to come swim. While waiting for her, I sat alone, feet in the water next to the ladder, and watched the overcrowded pool. After 5 minutes, a 60-year-old swimming woman got close to me. She asked for my name and said I had pretty eyes. I had learned to ignore strangers, so I didn't answer, and I was looking around for Carla. But now the lady was practically glued to my feet, and she asked,
"What are you doing alone? What are you waiting for? Why don't you come swim?"
I kept ignoring her, and then she grabbed my wrist, and I freaked out and realized something was wrong. So she could leave me alone, I said,
"I'm waiting for my friend. I'm not allowed to swim alone."
She replied that I could swim with her until my friend arrived, and I told her, no thank you, I'm not allowed. But she kept asking and holding my wrist. I was panicked and looked around, but nobody saw what was going on. My mom and the neighbors were sunbathing, and Carla wasn't around. I had no idea what to do, and the lady kept speaking to me, and felt like I had no other choice, so I went in the water. But I now realize it was a really dumb decision, since it would make it even harder for anybody to notice me. Then I remember feeling weird, as if I had lost control. She hugged me and I had to grab her shoulders while she started swimming. She would stop sometimes to make sure I was strongly holding her, and at one point I was so scared that I started to cry. And then the people in the pool finally noticed something was a bit weird and looked at me. 15 seconds later, Jock got me out of the water by one arm while screaming at the lady. The lady just seemed angry at him and she kept swimming. She didn't feel any shame at all. Only said she did nothing wrong. And I watched the scene while crying, but I cried even more when Jock got angry at me too. Then he took me to my mom and told her I had swam with a stranger. And it felt like I did something horribly wrong, like it was only my fault. The lady never got in any real trouble for what she did, but I, on the other hand, got yelled at for going into the water. So, to that creepy swimming lady, I will never know why you wanted me so badly to swim with you, but let's not meet again. 10 years later, I understand Jock was probably got angry at me because they were looking for me and probably got really scared. Please watch your kids. Don't leave them alone. And try to stay calm around them if something actually does happen. Number 2. Okay, so I'm 14 and often mistaken for 18 because of my shape. A little context. I was at the YMCA with my sisters and we were swimming for a while until I started to feel sick. My younger sister said,
"You don't look very good. Maybe you should go sit in the changing room for a while."
So I said, yeah, I think I will. I went in the changing room for some peace and quiet, and lucky me, nobody was in there. So I sat on one of the benches and just closed my eyes. A few minutes later, and I hear somebody come in. It was a guy. Tall, muscular, and genuinely good looking. I brushed it off, thinking he was probably waiting on his girlfriend and came to check on her because she was taking long or something. And that is until he approached me and sat right next to me, so close that our thighs were touching. I was really surprised. I scooted over and gave him that. "What do you think you're doing? Look." He smiled at me and said,
"Don't worry, girl. I'm not gonna hurt you."
and proceeded to put his hand on my back. I stood up and backed away. I was scared to run because he seemed very athletic, so he probably could have caught me. He asked me,
"How old are you, baby?"
in a sickeningly sweet tone. I say 14, and he nonchalantly says,
"Cool."
So I asked how old he was, and
23.
he then stood up and started walking over to me closer, and I backed away from him, and this was the turning point. I hear a bathroom stall open, and There standing, in all her glory, was a lady, who I'll call my hero. She stepped out, and I know she heard everything. And that dude hightailed it out of there. The lady was nice and stayed with me for a while. Her name was Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Me, the reader, hopes Stacy got everything she wanted. Number 3. This happened around 1997 when my family moved back to our home state after a few years of living all over the place. I was 10 and having a fun summer hanging out with some cousins who I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a particularly hot and boring summer day, so my cousins and I decided to go to the community pool. It was close to my house, so we all got on our bikes and rode over for an afternoon of fun. We lived in a small, safe town, so our parents were used to us going off by ourselves. We told them that we'd head back home right after the pool closed for the day, like always. We had a blast that day, and when it was finally time for the pool to close, my brother and cousin Jake went to the boys' locker room, and my cousin Alice and I went to the girls' locker room to change. I ended up changing quicker than Alice, so I went into the lobby to see if the boys were out there yet. The lobby was chaotic, with parents trying to herd kids out, and groups like ours trying to find everybody before leaving. It was noisy, busy, and tough to navigate for little 4'0" me. As I looked around for the boys, I felt someone grab my arm and start to lead me towards the exit. Since there were so many people, I thought someone had just mistaken me for their kid, so I looked up at the red-haired man who had my arm and I shouted,
Hey!
He barely looked down at me and started moving more insistently, staring intently at the exit as we slowly moved through the crowd. I shouted,
Let go of me!
and he didn't even flinch or acknowledge that I had spoken. And then it dawned on me that he wasn't mistaken after all, and was actually trying to take me. And I froze. I tried to remember what they told us in school about stranger danger and how to act, but I was drawing a blank. I eventually tried to shout,
I don't know you.
but it came out as a tiny squeak, and no one around me seemed to notice in all the chaos. I was scared. Finally, after what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, my cousin Jake came out of the locker room and spotted me. We made eye contact, and I think he could see how scared and confused I looked. He shouted my name, then I looked at the guy who had my arm and screamed.
Let go of my cousin.
I don't think the guy was expecting it. He immediately froze, looked at Jake, dropped my arm, and slid into the crowd. He just left. I was so relieved. I didn't care. I ran over to Jake, who asked me if I was okay. I was barely able to talk, so I just nodded and held on to his arm until everybody else came out. We never talked about it after that, and I've told my partner a few times, and my closest friends know the story. I became obsessive after this, searching sex offenders in our area to see if I could find this man, looking through news articles to see if anything similar had happened in our area around that time. But I never found anything, and eventually gave up. However, I did have lingering nightmares for years that somebody tried to take me, and I forgot how to scream. I still hate that I completely froze in that moment, and can't believe how lucky I was that Jake came out when he did. So, creepy red-headed man with the gross mustache and certainly less than noble intentions. Let's not meet. Number 4. When I was about 8 or 9, my family took a trip skiing to a small resort a couple of hours from where we lived in Spain. The resort itself was a sleepy little town of about 400 to 500 people max, with a few small supermarkets and hotels and not much else. Typically, we picked the worst time possible to embark on the trip, which we had been planning for a good few years. The night after we arrived, there was a blizzard, and so we spent the first half of the week locked in the hotel. Although we were able to go outside for the remaining few days, we had little to do given that the slopes were shut. The story I want to tell comes from those first few days locked in the hotel. Despite my parents' annoyance at the timing of the trip being a nightmare, myself and my sister, who's 11 months older than me, were having a fantastic time. Locked up in the mountains with nothing to do, we were able to spend our days running around the hotel, eating sweets, and watching the TV in the lobby. I should probably mention at this point that this hotel was somewhat of a maze. The large bar/restaurant area where my parents sat each day reading was at the center of the hotel. A myriad of smaller rooms then connected to the bar area at random points, shooting off into different directions. These rooms often had no discernible function. Each one had the same exact mahogany interior, and each were full of couches, fireplaces, and antiques that allowed for great games of hide and seek. The rooms would often have offshoot themselves, connecting to new rooms which would then connect to yet more useless wooden caves. And as such, it was possible to be 4 or 5 rooms away from the main hotel area at any one time without knowing exactly where you were or how to get back. But anyway, at some point along the weekend, myself and my sister decided to play hide and seek. Bearing in the mind above, it was almost an impossible challenge to find the hider, especially if they moved. And to this day, I'm certain my sister was a filthy little cheat. At one point in the game, I was just about to give up on searching for my sister until I heard her voice from what sounded like a few rooms away. And after successfully navigating the web of rooms, I emerged to find her sitting on a couch alongside a German man, with gray hair, probably in his 60s if I had had to guess. As soon as I emerged into the room, the man turned to me, and he told me he was taking my sister to the swimming pool, and asked if I wanted to come. And I remember immediately thinking it was odd that there was a swimming pool that we had never heard of. My parents had been complaining that morning about how much TV we were watching, and so I was sure they would have taken us there, and they had known about it. And beside, the hotel did not seem of the size to be able to host one. I told the man that I'd have to ask my parents first, and told my sister to come back with me to find them. He immediately replied that I should go and that he'd take my sister on ahead. I told my sister that she absolutely had to come with me, but excited at the thought of the swimming pool, she said she didn't want to, and we began to argue, with the man taking my sister's side and encouraging me to go ask my parents' permission whilst he waited with my sister. I dug my foot in, telling my sister that our parents would be very crossed if we went somewhere on our own. And after a few minutes bickering, she eventually gave in and came back with me, giving her assurance to the man that we would come back. Of course, when we told our parents, they were livid. My dad went back to the room to try to find the man, but with all the offshoots and given that all the random rooms looked the same, it was almost impossible to be sure that we were in the right one. In any case, there was no sign of him. I remember my dad screaming at the hotel lobby that he needed a list of all male guests and their room numbers, but of course they wouldn't give it to him. We spent the rest of the trip by our parents' side, terrified of the thought of being locked up in a blizzard with him, but thankfully we never saw the man again. And the scary part, as you can imagine, we checked the lobby and the hotel did not have a pool. So, scary German man who wanted to abduct me in a blizzard, let's not meet again. Number 5. Where I live, it isn't very common to own outdoor swimming pools, and I grew up in a tiny village where everybody knows everybody, so I was used to people talking to me that I didn't really know that well. Me and my family had been for a day shopping in town and decided to get fish and chips to take home for tea. Me and my mom went in and placed our order, but had to wait a while for it to cook. While we're waiting, the middle-aged man working offers me a chip and I take it and say thank you. He starts commenting on how polite I am and asking me my name and how old I am. My mom just thinking he was being friendly and trying to keep me occupied while we waited, and allowed us to chat about my favorite toys, etc., just kid stuff. And this is when he starts telling my mom that I'm very pretty and that he likes my dress. He says I'm very smart and how I'm being a good girl. And since I'm so good, I should be allowed a treat. And if I would like to visit his house and play in his swimming pool. And now, like I said, I'm a little kid here, so I thought I was just being praised for being so good, and I was excited to get a treat, but Mom obviously said no, and we had to get home and have tea. And he told me to stop eating the chips because tea was almost ready, and she tried to laugh it off while we waited for our food. He became silent for a minute, and then he asked again if I wanted to swim in his pool. And of course, being a little kid, I said I would like a treat since I've been so good. Mom says that it's very kind to offer, but no, as we need her to get home, mentioning my dad and sister waiting in the car for us. He got more insistent, saying he'll cook me tea and that obviously I wanted to go with him since he had a swimming pool and I would have loads of fun, even saying that maybe tomorrow he could pick me up and he would give her a break for the day. My mom is still laughing and being polite, but she took my hand to stop me running off. I remember being confused because usually I was allowed to accept treats and visit my friends' houses and other adults, babysitters, family friends, etc., who watched me. He continues until the food is ready with Mum, and politely but firmly saying no, and the man insisting I would have fun, let me go with him, my Mom just says no. And the food is ready and we leave. When we get home, Mom explains to me that if anybody that I don't know asks me to go with them, I should scream, quote unquote, the most naughty words you can think of, and run away as fast as you can. In my village, you couldn't sneeze in the street without 6 people looking to see who caused the commotion, so swearing would certainly cause attraction. She tried to explain a little about how not everybody is a good person and some people do bad things, etc., and it scared me enough that it now stuck in my head. I'd never returned to the shop till about 10 years later when new people bought it. So, that's the first time anybody tried anything weird with me, even if I didn't understand it at the time. Had a creepy experience with a guy who kinda stalked me and some stories about a friend of mine, after he told me he loved me out of the blue, and of course I didn't feel the same if anybody's interested. Number 6. A couple of summers ago, my family didn't have a car, so I'd take a bus to the pool in our old neighborhood to see my friends. The pool building was under construction, so I would change in the woods if I needed to. Bad idea, but 15-year-old me was a dumbass. Anyway, one day I got there before anybody else, and I started swimming laps in the pool. And this pool was outdoors, and also built into a hill. Well, imagine my surprise when I came up for air to find a man standing on the opposite side of the fence holding a camera aimed at me. I was the only person in the pool, and the camera was most certainly pointed in my direction. As soon as I stood still, he realized that I had caught him, and he flew back down the hill, so to the freak at the pool, please, let's not meet ever again. Number 7. This happened when I was about 11. My 2 friends and I, all of us male, were swimming in my friend's backyard one night around 10 p.m. My friend's house borders the junior high school property and is separated by a chain link fence. As we were swimming, I look over, and I see a tall man dressed in black and a baseball cap, standing there zombie-like, just watching us. For some reason, I didn't get scared, I just thought it was weird. And I mentioned him to my friends, who both looked over and immediately start screaming their heads off and swimming away just to get out of the pool. The reaction woke me the hell up to the reality of the situation, and I almost shat my swimming suit. were one by one trying to use the ladder, and I was in the rear, so as I'm waiting, I look over. And this guy is scrambling up the fence as fast as he can. And as he's chasing us, we made it to the house and managed to slam the door and lock it just as he reaches the door. And this was the back door, which was about 80% clear glass, so he just stood there, looking at us, as we screamed our heads off. As he's doing this, I notice he's holding a goddamn baseball bat. We run and hide behind the living room couch, and he keeps juggling the doorknob, but luckily never uses the bat to break the glass, which would have been easy. He walks away, and my friend runs and turns the security alarm on and calls his dad, who was off running errands. My friend's dad said he was almost home and just to stay inside. So anyway, we just turn on the TV and start to calm down when all of a sudden the alarm goes off again. I almost crapped in my swimming suit for the second time, and our stupid 11-year-old minds decide to just stand there, and screaming was the best option. My friend's dad happened to get home while this is happening. Gives the operator the secret password that everything is good. Grabs his gun and searches the property, but didn't find anybody. And we still swam at night after that and never met that crazy dude again. And also, I'm 25 now, so don't ask why we didn't just call the cops or why my friend's dad didn't call the cops, because I really have no idea why we didn't.